What's up, everybody? My name is Fernanda Sesto. I was born and raised in Uruguay, but I'm currently a senior at the University of Rochester in New York, and I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship, technology, and building things. I've been involved with the venture capital space since my freshman year of college, and I decided to create this podcast because I want to bring visibility to Latin America as an emerging market and help investors and just people who are interested in investing in the region to understand more about the ecosystem there. I will be interviewing investors and entrepreneurs, talking about their career, their experiences, trends, and everything related to ventures. Gadi started XX, an accelerator focused on finding and investing in the best founders before anyone else. He's now working on the launch of a new fund, Antigravity. In this episode, I talked to him about his path from being a student at Minerva Schools in San Francisco to being a partner of a VC fund. I'm very excited to have another Uruguayan in the podcast, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hi, Gadi. How are you?
Good, really good.
I'm so happy to have another Uruguayan in the podcast. Thank you a lot for being here.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think we met a bit over a year ago, maybe, and I remember like the introduction was literally like, I think this is like the only other Uruguayan that's kind of like in the world of VC. So it's pretty cool.
You're probably the only other Uruguayan in the world VC who is like the same age as you.
Right, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Anyway, can you give us a quick intro about yourself and what you're doing and stuff like that?
Yeah, of course. I'm Gadi. I lived my entire life in Uruguay. I always wanted to kind of like be that kid that would be able to study abroad. But I mean, that's probably, you did it yourself as well. Like there's no culture of like thinking how to navigate the process of going to study abroad. Like no one really comes to tell you like, this is a possibility that you can think about. So I literally just kind of like did it the way that I knew how. And I wasn't born and raised in like a Jewish community back in Uruguay. I mean, I went to like a kind of like agnostic school. I did the IB, I was very lucky to do that exam. But my dad was Israeli, so it's like Israel is probably like the only place that I could go study abroad for free. I'm just gonna go live there. I mean, like fuck it. So I didn't know the language, I didn't know the culture, I didn't know anything. So I went 6 months first to go live in a kibbutz, which is like the socialist commune. Like in Israel, it's like the only place where these things actually work. And it was an incredible program because it's like 80 people like all going to live there, much older. Like the average was probably like 26. And like as in just turned 18 years old, like I'm surrounded by people from all over the world, much older than me, that became my friends. Like I grew up a ton there, and like the job was like very harsh, like probably the hardest work I'll ever do in my life. I had to wake up at like 5 a.m. every day to like clean fish ponds and like go through like the entire cycle of like fish production. And then I would learn Hebrew and have fun. But from there, I kind of like ended up applying to this university called Minerva in San Francisco. I got in and I literally just left everything in Israel and I went directly to San Francisco. And I guess that's where like the real, like the kind of like the startups VC life really started. Like I only got exposed to the startup industry from here and I fell in love with it really fast. Like, like everyone is open to having a conversation as a young student that comes from like such a small culture. It's like, oh shit, like it literally just starts changing who you are in many ways. I started meeting like a lot of really important mentors in my life and I thought I would want to be a founder. So there was this YC company called WeFunder that essentially allows any other company to raise money from not rich people, like smaller check sizes. And it's kind of like a really cool story that we can talk about afterwards. But it was a very different company back then. I think now like there are over 100 people and I joined when we were like just 7 as an intern. I had to hunt them down because they were ignoring all my emails. And they gave me a job because I literally hunted them down. They probably wouldn't have given it to me otherwise. And that was incredible because like very, very quickly, like I started working directly with the CEO. He becomes like my most important mentor at that point. We lived together in the same house, like weird stuff. But I was kind of like leading like a bunch of like the growth stuff at that point. And then we started XX, which was the spin-off from WeFunder to write checks into founders that we thought had incredible potential before they became obviously great. So in practice, 50% of the checks that we wrote, we were the first serious money in. And what we were trying to do was really replicating the magic that maybe Y Combinator lost from its early days of like the small, intimate 8 to 10 company cohorts with mentors, everything in person, like hoping that maybe a founder that goes through the batch would end up having like a lifelong friend that is part of their wedding 10 years down the road. And I learned everything from there because like we built XX myself and 2 other partners, and yeah, I started raising the funds. We were investing in all these companies. We invested in like 37 companies, a little bit over $2 million. That, I mean, the companies, like the funds are doing really well now. And I fell in love. Like it was kind of like that changed my entire perspective on like kind of like the first route that I want to take in my life, from the founder side to the investor side in this specific stage. And I decided I wanted to continue doing that. So through XX, we were working the last kind of like almost 2 years with a guy called Daniel Ha, which is like a guy that's much older than me and a lot more successful than me. But we got really close, and now we're starting this fund together. Like I moved on from XX like over a month ago, and we're just getting started with this new thing. But I'm super excited. It's going really well.
Nice. Do you have a name for the new fund?
Yeah, it's called Antigravity.
Antigravity. Oh, nice. That's such a cool name. I like it.
Yeah.
Is it like the Antigravity Fund, or is it just Antigravity?
No, it's gonna be Antigravity Capital.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean the kind of like the domain email will actually probably be more like angercapital.com. So we'll see how that catches with people. Like if people start calling us like the angry people or something, but we'll see.
That's cool. Well, congrats on the new launch of the fund. That's such a big, and like,
yeah, I probably talked for too much.
No, but I mean, like, that's such a long path to get to where you are right now. I think that's pretty
very
cool.
Random.
Yeah, I'm very admirable that you've been through all these different like stages. I kind of resonate a lot with what you said about being a founder. Like I also, when I came here, I've always had this entrepreneurial mindset of like, I wanted to start something and like be a founder as well. And that's like drove me into like startups. And now I feel like as I'm exploring the VC industry, I want to like still have this, entrepreneurial mindset. As on the other side.
I mean, you have it, right? You're starting your own podcast.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so but like you mentioned that when you went to San Francisco, that's when you kind of got exposed to more like the startups and VC industry and like environment. So what exactly like drove you to there? Like what interested you in this space, in this ecosystem?
Like once I was in San Francisco, or to get to San Francisco in the first place?
No, in general, like what interested you in startups in VC? Like what was your main
I think the truth of once you are in SF already is that you have no choice. Like people are kind of like spatting startups into your face, like you can't hide away from technology once you're here. But once, like when I first got to SF, I had no clue I actually wanted to go down this route. Like when I first started my freshman year of college, I was gonna do research. Like my first applications to internships were to like Santa Fe Institute, which is like a complex systems like research institute. I just literally just wanted to be a PhD or something. And I ended up dropping out of college to start my own fund. So clearly didn't happen the same way. But I think that the truth that is so hard for me to explain is just the general culture that exists in San Francisco once you're here. The people that you meet, the stories that you learn about, the energy that just kind of like feeds your soul. Like it goes so deep. And I mean, I'm like that, I was always the person to take risks. I was always the person to try living my own story and like try breaking apart kind of like the frameworks or archetypes that I thought I had to follow in my mind. So I very quickly fell in love with the kind of person that is a founder. And I mean, I think it wasn't like a conscious process, but like one day, like in a process of like 2-3 months, I was trying to kind of like learn about startups instead of like school. So I think it was like a gradual process.
That's cool. Definitely the environment where you are kind of influences like your interests. It
really does. I mean, I talk about that like with friends, back home that do not get to be here, or even friends here when they're deciding going like the big tech route, like should I get a job at Facebook or join like a more interesting startup after college? And I always say the same thing, like whatever you choose will either make you smarter or dumber, and it's really up to you what you decide.
That's a good phrase. Okay, so I know you are, like you have experience in SF and like you have invested there. But as a Uruguayan, I know that you also track, the Latin American ecosystem. And so I'm curious, like, do you have specific like interests, or like what type of trends are you excited about in Latin America in the startup ecosystem there?
Yeah. Let me think. It's actually like a hard question. In general, like this is always like a little bit hard for me to understand exactly where I stand. I care about the ecosystem at a personal level a lot. And I think what's really cool for me in the position that I am is that I get to meet a lot of the people that have a very similar life story to mine, like the Uruguayan, the Argentinian, the Mexican, that somehow managed to leave their own countries and get to the United States and start here and think globally. And like, I mean, that's very much like one of the biggest natural filters of talent, right? Like if you already are the person that gets to the US, San Francisco, from like an emerging market, you're probably one of the best in your country. And like, that's like that kind of founder I always really love meeting. So from like a personal level, like I love working and investing in immigrants from that perspective. In terms of like specific trends in Latin America, like, I mean, there's so much, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of like that common knowledge of like just Latin America is like infrastructure wise 10 years behind. And like, I mean, the startups of today are just building that out. From an investor hat, sometimes investing in some of that feels insincere to me because it's very different. Like, I don't know, like if there's like a last mile solution in Peru that comes and pitches me like, yeah, like we're rethinking last mile, or like we're rethinking e-commerce and all that stuff. Like there's so many like layers to the culture that you miss out if you're not like living there. So there's a lot of trends that excite me. And then there's some that I just don't think I'm like smart enough to even consider investing in. So I guess like the kind of like the investor persona and then like who I am at a person level wanting LatAm to improve are not always like aligned in that sense. But yeah,
That's
I don't know if that
interesting.
makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. I think, that's true. Like once like, you're kind of like outside of the ecosystem and you're not living there, you're not seeing, also like each Latin American country is very different from each other. So it's not that, you're Uruguayan, but that doesn't mean that you understand how like Colombians like exactly like work and like their problems and stuff. So
yeah, and my point is that it really depends on the kind of market that you're building for in that country. That like, I mean, sometimes like there's some general truths that are a lot easier for me to understand and like develop some analogies on. And then there's the classic, like very much in-person kind of product, like in the real world that like, then you gotta be very acquainted with the culture to actually understand and break apart the company at that initial product market fit stage.
Cool. I like that response. I think it's like important to make that distinction of like, okay, here's like, I'm like my investor side and here's like what I care about like at a personal level. I think that's cool. So, I'm like, I admire you, Gadi, because like you are like my same age and like you're already like doing my dream basically, which is starting your own fund. I think that's very cool. And I'm just like, like what type, like what advice do you can like give us, like folks, like young folks like me, and like others who are listening to the podcast who are interested in starting their own fund, and specifically if they're Latin Americans, for example, or they're Latinos who were raised here, and who like were technically underrepresented in this industry. So what are the struggles you've had, and like as a Latin American and as someone who you like, you're an immigrant as well, like you came like from Uruguay on your own. So I'm just curious to hear that, like about that experience.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I wish I would have like true tactical like recipe kind of advice on how to kind of like climb the ladder in that sense. I don't, right? Like my experience has been chaotic, right? Like I just generated enough exposure in life that I met some people that really believed in me and were willing to take shots on who I was without me being able to show for much, but they got to know me and like I earned their trust. And like I guess it's a combination of generating enough exposure with like understanding when is the right time to take like a big jump or a risk to change your path in a way that like it makes sense to where you want to get. um but I'll be honest, at the same time, it never came from a place where I felt I was a minority. I never had to go through that uh like shit, like I feel like I have incredible talent here, but because I'm an immigrant, because I'm from Uruguay, because English is not my first language, now I can't get to where I want to be. I mean, in many ways I'm very lucky because I went to like a school that taught me English to an extent, and then I improved it when I went abroad to Israel. And I mean I still look like somewhat European, so I don't get discriminated by people that would, maybe to someone with a darker skin that comes from like Latin America or something.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, to an extent, I feel like not putting yourself in the box of a minority is your ultimate advantage, because it doesn't affect your mindset in any negative way. You know, like sometimes like you do need to kind of like unlock yourself from any single constraint to think that you can actually do what you think you can and believe in yourself. So to an extent, I feel like you do have to ignore like all these data and all these numbers and all these minorities and all these constraints, because I mean you are on an individual path and you're no similar to any other Uruguayan you'll ever meet, to like, right, like at a deeper level, and like no one that went through a similar path will define your own. And at a general level, like you want to fight for change and you want to fight for more access. At an individual level, you'll always have to believe that you can be the exception to every single rule. Yeah, I don't know, we can talk really like for a long time on that one.
About that, yeah, definitely. I actually, that reminds me, I did a research like a few years ago, and I was studying kind of like how there's like a I don't remember, this is technical term for this that I'm like blanking on right now, but it's basically the concept is like when you're a minority and you already have your own bias based on like what it's thought of that group, and that sometimes can limit you from taking opportunities or like feeling comfortable, like, you know, in certain environments. 100%. So I was studying it at like an academic level, so like how women feel in like STEM classes, and sometimes like there's already this stigma around like, oh, women don't do well in math, so a lot of women choose not to take math classes sometimes because they have this own like misconception. And so it's like interesting because there's a technical name for that I forget, but there's like what you're just saying, that like,
yeah, like sort of like confirmation bias.
Yeah,
of some sort.
Sort of.
It's
like
true.
at a personal level, so it's like what you think of your, like, you know.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, like ultimately, like you have to be very, very careful with just what you assume is true, because if you really believe it, then you won't question it. And if you believe you are a minority and because of that people will overlook you, then you will expect to be overlooked. And then like, how do you expect to be the best? So to an extent, like if you can use it as a chip on your shoulder that drives you and kind of like gives you more energy than the person on, like next to you in that competition, then good. But if it makes you feel smaller, then terrible, right? And you need to be very careful on how you navigate those emotions.
Yeah, that's good. And in general, like career advice that, like, you know, you've received from peers, not peers, mentors, and like, you know, also from peers. I mean, it could work too, but
I mean, maybe I'll share the story of how I got my first job, because I guess it's like that's the point. Like with WeFounder, I knew it was the right place for me to learn about startups. Like I knew that was the exposure that I wanted, and once I somewhat like obsessed, like stubbornly assumed like that had to be my path, like I kind of like was wondering like, how the hell do I do that? You know, it's like I emailed Nick, the CEO, saying like, hey, I want an internship here. Like, this is who I am. And started like, he ignored me. Like he answered, but then he ignored me, and I follow up and he ignored me like 3 or 4 times. He's like, okay, this is not going to work. I'm already being ghosted. So it's like, let me find their house. Like, let me just try introducing myself in person, you know? And I Googled the house, and there was no public address on the internet on where they worked from. Like, their Google Maps said that they're in Boston, but I clearly knew they were in San Francisco. And there was this old article of what culture looked like at WeFounder. So I saw pictures of the house, and I saw the corner. It's like, okay, let me go there. So I literally just went to that corner, and from the pictures, tried finding that first office, knock on the door. The guy that comes out is like, WeFounder moved out from here, but I think they know where they went. I just like, whatever, you know, I'm already here. I already spent like hours of my life getting to this point. So I called an Uber, went to the second house, and the house was empty. Like, it's like a see-through kind of glass. Like, there was no furniture. So I literally asked the neighbors, like, hey, do you know, like, was there like a company called WeFounder here? It's like, yeah, I have this one phone number. Like, they moved out like 2 weeks ago, but let me reach out to this guy and ask him where they went. And that guy answered. He actually had kind of like stepped down from WeFounder, but it was in a sabbatical, but answered. And then I got the address, went to their house, and it was only Nick, the CEO, that was in the house that day. And the moment that I told him how I was like an obsessive stalker and like creepy as hell, that's the kind of thing that he wanted to see. And he hired me on the spot. And like, I mean, that was a super important story and experience for myself as well. Because like, I wasn't born with that attitude every single day. Like, that obsession is the exceptions. But then the fact that it's like, once you are willing to go like a step further than everyone else probably will, like, you get what you want. It's like a really nice lesson that people our age should expose themselves a little bit more frequently to, because then it makes you believe that you can do things on after you've been ghosted. You know, you can, there's still a second, third, fourth path to still get what you want.
Yeah, so like perseverance, basically, you know, like trying to like keep trying till you like make it, basically.
Yeah, and have fun.
Yeah,
Through that weird process, you know.
Were you alone when you were tracking them, or were you with friends?
I was
Oh
alone.
wow, you were literally tracking. I thought when you mentioned that earlier, you meant like you were following up like with emails and stuff like that, but you were actually tracking them, like
Right.
literally from house to house. That's so funny. That's a cool story.
Yeah.
That's a cool story. Okay, so the last question I have is, do you have any hot takes about ventures in Latin America or in like San Francisco?
I maybe it's a boring answer. It's less of a hot take. I think a lot of like Latin American founders, and for this point, just international in general, when they have the ambition to compete against founders in San Francisco, for example, which for that case might be like another international that just moved to SF instead. Like, there's always like this myth of like, or like not a myth, but like a true reality of like, oh, it's so hard for me to kind of like find access to VCs and raise capital and all these different stuff. It's like, I just don't know how to do all these things. And that's totally fair. And it's incredibly hard. And if you're not in the culture, it's incredibly hard for you to understand how it works. But I think the industry got to a point where there's so much available information online that if you're not capable of like leveraging the low hanging fruits of like how you can get better and how you can compete as a founder in ways that now you can learn to do for free, then to an extent is your own fault. And maybe that's my hot take, you know, that like a lot of the people that do complain about how hard it is as an international to like access this world, ultimately they spend a lot more energy complaining than trying to figure out the right steps to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big hot take. that's I think that's the strongest hot take I've had in the podcast.
No, I mean, I can obviously defend it both sides, but like the more optimistic, I think it's actually very optimistic, you know, because it's like realizing that there's so much you actually can do to get better, you know, like there's so many early stage founders that I met that never read a single essay from Paul Graham, or like never watched a video from YC startups or stuff like that. It's like, that's literally like 20 minutes of your time as you're like eating breakfast every single day that will make you meaningfully a little bit more acquainted with the industry, with the words, with how to do a good deck, with how to present yourself, with understanding the importance of markets and all this different stuff. That if you just don't know how to think about startups to begin with, like start by reading the books and then try doing something else. But like if you don't know anything, start by learning. I don't know.
Yeah. That's a good. It's like, you know, don't be lazy. Basically, just try to do the work. And if you really have the motivation, like,
Right.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of resources
And I guess
available.
that would take to like a different conversation, which is like so many founders, or for let's say people in general, like try doing something for the wrong reasons, because things tend to kind of like from the outside they tend to be like the best life in the world, and from the inside it's like a daily nightmare in some ways. And when you choose to build a company or anything for that matter, but like kind of like risk your life in some meaningful way, you have to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons and not to like, I don't know, make money quick or something like that, because it typically doesn't work out like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Gadi. I had a lot of fun in this conversation. Thank you
It was
for
fun.
being in the podcast.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. I definitely had a lot of fun in this episode. We talked about many different things, and I really admire Gadi for all the work he has done and all the things that he's going to achieve in the future as well. And I really like having Uruguayans in the podcast because it really shows all the talent that there's in my country as well. I hope you really enjoy it, and I hope to see you back.